A millionaire is working on his laptop in a luxury cafe when he observes a 6-year-old girl being rudely expelled by the owner after asking for old bread. Busy with his meeting, he doesn't intervene. Minutes later, while leaving down the sidewalk, he hears a child's voice from a dark alley whispering, "Thank you, Heavenly Father, for this bread." When he approaches to investigate, his heart breaks. The same girl is kneeling beside an overturned trash can, praying and tenderly holding the same moldy bread she found among the scraps. What he does when he sees her carefully storing this treasure in a cardboard box changes both their lives forever. The summer afternoon poured its golden light over the bustling downtown streets as Ricardo Vance adjusted his Italian tie for the 10th time. At 42, he had built a business empire based on the mathematical precision of every decision, the calculated coolness of every move. His fingers glided across the laptop keyboard with the same dexterity with which he commanded board meetings, while his sharp voice echoed through his Bluetooth headset. "Third quarter numbers are unacceptable, Martinez. I want a detailed explanation by 5 o'clock, or you can start looking for another job." The high-end gourmet bistro around him breathed exclusivity. The aroma of premium coffee mingled with the elegant murmur of conversations in different languages, creating a symphony of privilege that enveloped him like a familiar comfort. Ricardo had chosen this spot not only for the quality of its service, but for the guarantee that he wouldn't be disturbed by undesirable elements that could break his concentration. His attention was completely absorbed by the profit spreadsheet when a small shadow crossed his peripheral vision. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, approached the main counter timidly. Her worn clothes told stories of cold nights and days without a bath, while her bare feet left almost imperceptible marks on the polished marble floor of the establishment. Ricardo frowned, irritated by the distraction, but couldn't help but watch as the child addressed the owner. Her voice was an almost inaudible whisper, laden with a humility that cut the air like a sharp blade. "Please, mister, could I have a piece of day-old bread? I'm very hungry." The answer came like a slap to the face of human dignity. The owner, a corpulent man with a graying mustache, rose from behind the counter like a storm about to break. "Get out of here now and don't come back. This is a respectable establishment, not a shelter for beggars." The words echoed through the refined ambiance like stones thrown into a crystal-clear lake. Ricardo felt a shiver run down his spine, but his virtual meeting demanded immediate attention. The Japanese investors wouldn't wait for an emotional pause, and $15 million depended on his complete concentration at that moment. The girl recoiled like a wounded animal, her large, dark eyes shining with suppressed tears. She didn't say a word, just turned and disappeared through the glass door, leaving behind only the echo of her trampled dignity and the lingering scent of her vulnerability. "Mr. Vance, are you listening?" The irritated voice of the Japanese investor brought Ricardo back to the reality of business. "Yes, perfectly. As I was saying, the profit margin in the Asian sector." 40 minutes later, with the contract electronically signed and a few more millions secured in his bank account, Ricardo closed his laptop with the satisfaction of someone who had just conquered another territory on life's chessboard. He packed his belongings with the mechanical precision that characterized his every move and headed for the exit, already mentally reviewing the next appointments on his impeccably organized schedule. The sidewalk baked under the relentless sun when he emerged from the air-conditioned bistro. The thermal contrast made him hesitate for an instant, adjusting his sunglasses and checking messages on his phone. It was then that a delicate voice, coming from somewhere nearby, cut through the urban buzz like a whisper from another world. "Thank you, Heavenly Father, over this bread." Ricardo stopped abruptly, his heart pounding without logical explanation. The voice came from a narrow alleyway next to the bistro, a shadowy corridor he had never noticed in his countless visits to the place. Something stronger than curiosity, something he couldn't name, pulled him towards that darkness. What his eyes found there would change the course of his existence forever. The alley plunged Ricardo into a reality his eyes, accustomed to luxury, struggled to process. The cool shadow contrasted brutally with the scorching afternoon heat, but what truly chilled him was the scene unfolding a few feet away. The same girl who had been expelled from the bistro was kneeling beside an overturned trash can, her small fingers holding with religious reverence a piece of clearly moldy bread. She hadn't noticed him yet. Her lips moved in a silent prayer as she carefully examined every crumb of the spoiled bread, as if it were a treasure found after years of searching. Ricardo felt his chest tighten, a physical sensation he hadn't experienced in decades. It was as if an invisible fist had squeezed his heart. "Thank you for giving me the strength to find food today," the child murmured, raising the moldy bread towards the sky. "And please help my little sister not to cry so much today." The mention of a second child hit Ricardo like a punch to the gut. His eyes scanned the alley with new urgency, looking for signs of another presence. It was then that he noticed, partially hidden behind stacked cardboard boxes, an even smaller figure. A girl who couldn't have been more than 4 years old watched the scene with huge eyes, her tiny fingers clutching a tattered blanket that looked more like a rag. Ricardo took a step forward, and the sound of his Italian shoe against the uneven asphalt echoed like a gunshot in the alley's silence. The older girl startled, instinctively hiding the bread behind her back, as if caught committing a crime. Her eyes met his, and Ricardo saw a fear so profound that he felt his legs tremble. "I won't do anything bad, mister," she whispered, her voice laden with a submission that broke his heart. "I was just thanking for the food. I won't dirty your nice clothes." The simplicity of those words demolished something inside Ricardo. He, who had spent his life building emotional walls, shielding himself against any vulnerability that might compromise his business efficiency, felt all those defenses crumble like sand castles before a tsunami. You're going to eat that?" he asked, his voice sounding strange to his own ears, weaker and more hesitant than he had ever allowed himself to be. The girl nodded vehemently, as if she feared he would take the bread from her. "Yes, mister. It's still good. It just has a little bit of green, but I can scrape it off." She showed him the bread, pointing with childish pride to the parts she considered salvageable. "I found it in a bag the man from the bistro threw out. It's probably just from yesterday." Ricardo looked closer at the bread and his stomach churned. The mold wasn't just a little bit of green. It was an infestation that made the food clearly unfit for consumption. Yet, for that child, it represented the difference between sleeping hungry or with something in her stomach. "And your little sister?" he asked, pointing discreetly to the figure hidden behind the boxes. "She's still small, so I eat first to see if it doesn't make me sick. If I'm okay. Tomorrow I'll give her a little piece." The childish logic was devastatingly practical. "She doesn't like it when I get sick, because then I can't look for food very well." The revelation that the 6-year-old girl was responsible for feeding an even younger child hit Ricardo with the force of a divine revelation. He had spent the entire day worried about profit margins and stock holdings, while a few feet from his office, 2 children were fighting a daily battle for survival. "What's your name?" he asked, surprised by the kindness that emerged naturally from his voice. "Sophia," she replied, still holding the bread like a talisman. "And she's Anna. She doesn't talk much because she's scared of big people." "And you live here?" The question came out before Ricardo could censor it, but he needed to understand the extent of that silent tragedy. Sophia pointed to a darker corner of the alley, where Ricardo could make out a makeshift structure made of cardboard, plastic, and scraps of fabric. It was smaller than his closet, but it housed the only family those 2 children knew. "Ever since Daddy and Mommy went to heaven," Sophia explained with the same naturalness with which other children talked about dinner. "The lady at the shelter said she would separate us, so I took Anna and we came to live here. No one can separate us if no one finds us." The devastating innocence of that explanation made something inside Ricardo shatter completely. He looked at his own hands, manicured and adorned with a watch that cost more than most people earned in a year, and then at Sophia's small, dirty hands, which held a rotten piece of bread as if it were the most precious thing in the world. In that moment, in the muffled silence of the alley, with the smell of garbage mixing with the distant aroma of gourmet coffee, Ricardo Vance faced the first truly transformative crisis of his adult life. Ricardo remained motionless for long seconds, watching Sophia carefully put the moldy bread into a small cardboard box she treated like a precious safe. Every movement of the child was deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if she had developed a sacred protocol to preserve any crumb of food she managed to find. "Sophia," he said finally, his voice sounding softer than he ever imagined it could be. "What would you say if I offered you a gift?" The girl looked up, distrust and hope battling silently on her small face. Her experiences with adults had clearly taught her to be cautious, but hunger and desperation whispered possibilities she dared not verbalize. "What kind of gift, mister?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have money to pay." The innocence of the question cut Ricardo more deeply than any business criticism he had ever received. A 6-year-old child had already learned that everything in life had a price, that nothing came without a trade-off, that even basic kindness required payment. "You don't have to pay anything," he replied, slowly kneeling to her height. The movement made his Italian pants scrape against the dirty asphalt. But for the first time in decades, Ricardo didn't care about his clothes. "What if I took you and Anna to eat something delicious? Real food, hot, just for you two." Sophia looked at him as if he had just promised her the moon. Her eyes scanned his face, looking for signs of lies or cruelty, that premature vigilance that abandoned children develop to survive. Behind the cardboard boxes, Anna made an almost imperceptible movement, approaching a few inches. "Can we eat together?" Sophia asked, pointing to her little sister. "I won't go if she can't." The absolute loyalty between the two children touched something in Ricardo he didn't know still existed. How many times in his business life had he sacrificed relationships in the name of profit? How many people had he abandoned when they became inconvenient for his goals? And there was a 6-year-old child demonstrating an integrity he had long lost. "Of course, you can eat together," he assured, extending his hand towards Sophia. "Your sisters stay together." Sophia hesitated for a moment, then looked at her cardboard box. "Can I put my bread away first? Because if we can't find food tomorrow, it will still be here." The desperate foresight of the child, planning for future hunger while receiving an offer of immediate food, revealed to Ricardo the depth of the trauma those girls carried. They had learned that abundance was temporary, that hunger was permanent, that it was better to keep moldy bread saved than to trust the promise of an unknown adult. "You can put it away." "Yes," he said, watching as Sophia placed the bread in the box, with the care of someone guarding a sacred relic. "And you know what else? We'll make sure you never have to eat old bread again." For the first time since he had found her, Sophia smiled. It wasn't a full smile, she was too cautious for that, but it was a small curl of the lips that lit up her dirty face like a ray of sunshine breaking through heavy clouds. Anna finally emerged completely from her hiding place, revealing herself as an even more fragile version of Sophia. Her clothes were in worse condition, her hair more tangled, her eyes more sunken. She approached her older sister like a satellite orbiting its protective planet. "Anna, this mister wants to give us delicious food," Sophia explained, putting a protective arm around her little sister's shoulders. "But only if you want to come with us." Anna nodded timidly, hiding her face in Sophia's shoulder. Ricardo noticed that she sucked her thumb with an intensity that suggested deep anxiety, a self-comforting mechanism she had developed to deal with constant fear. "Then it's decided," Ricardo said. standing up and discreetly wiping away the tears that had begun to form in the corners of his eyes. "Let's find the best place in town for two princesses to eat as they deserve." Sophia looked at him with curiosity. "Princesses?" "Of course," Ricardo replied, surprised by the ease with which the words came out. "All girls are princesses. Some just need to be reminded of it." As they walked towards the alley exit, Sophia holding Anna's hand firmly and Ricardo guiding them with a protectiveness that sprang from somewhere deep in his soul. He had no idea he was taking the first step on a journey that would test every fiber of his character. The high-end gourmet bistro appeared before them like a portal between two worlds. Ricardo stopped at the entrance, observing through the glass the same environment where everything had begun just an hour earlier. The contrast between what he had been when leaving and what he was becoming upon returning was so profound that he almost didn't recognize himself. But when Sophia looked at the establishment and instinctively took a step back, whispering, "I can't go in, mister. The man won't let me," Ricardo discovered that his transformation was just beginning. The fear on Sophia's face as she recoiled from the bistro was like a dagger plunged into Ricardo's chest. To see a 6-year-old child demonstrate genuine terror in front of a place that for him represented just another luxurious amenity of urban life revealed the true dimension of the social chasm that separated their worlds. "I can't go in, mister," Sophia repeated, holding Anna's hand even tighter. "The man was very angry with me. He said I can never come back." Ricardo felt something boil within his chest. A primal anger he hadn't experienced since childhood. Throughout his business career, he had learned to channel irritation into calculated strategies, to transform frustration into leverage for negotiations. But this was different. This was personal in a way he couldn't rationalize. "You're with me now," he said, his voice carrying an authority that made Sophia look up in surprise. "No one will treat you badly while I'm here." He pushed the glass door with a determination that surprised even himself. The delicate bell that announced the arrival of customers sounded like a war gong in his ears. Some patrons looked curiously at the unlikely trio. A man in an impeccable business suit accompanied by two visibly poor children. The bistro owner looked up from the cash register and his expression immediately shifted from commercial cordiality to ill-concealed irritation. His eyes fixed on Sophia and then on Ricardo, as if trying to decipher a particularly unpleasant enigma. "Mr. Vance," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good to see you back, but I believe there's been a misunderstanding." He pointed discreetly at the girls. "This establishment has certain policies regarding—" "They're with me," Ricardo interrupted, his voice cutting the air like a sharp blade. "And I'd like a table for 3, please." The owner hesitated, his nervous hands drumming on the counter. It was obvious he didn't want to confront an important client, but the children's presence clearly disturbed him deeply. Other patrons began to whisper among themselves, their glances alternating between curiosity and disapproval. "Mr. Vance, you understand we have a very specific clientele here," the man began, but Ricardo didn't let him finish. "I understand perfectly," he replied, taking a step forward. "I understand that this establishment serves food and that these two girls need to eat. I understand that I have money to pay and that you are in the business of selling food in exchange for money. What exactly isn't clear in this equation?" Sophia squeezed Ricardo's hand, her gaze alternating between admiration and terror. She had never seen an adult defend her like that, with that controlled ferocity that made the air around them seem charged with electricity. The bistro owner looked around, noticing that other customers were observing the scene with increasing interest. Some seemed to support Ricardo, others shook their heads in disapproval. The situation was becoming a public spectacle, exactly what he wanted to avoid. "Mr. Vance, you are a valuable customer, but these children are not dressed appropriately for our environment. We have standards to maintain." That was the last straw. Ricardo felt decades of emotional control crumble like a broken dam. His voice, when it emerged, carried an authority that silenced the entire establishment. "These children have more dignity in their little finger than many of your appropriate clients have in their entire bodies," he roared. His finger pointed directly at the man's chest. "They are clean, they are not bothering anyone, and I am willing to pay for everything they consume. If that's not enough for your refined establishment, then perhaps it's time for me to reevaluate where I spend my money." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the barista stopped making coffee to observe the confrontation. Sophia looked at Ricardo as if he were a superhero who had descended from the heavens to defend her, while Anna hid behind his legs, using him as a protective shield. "And one more thing," Ricardo continued, his voice dropping to a dangerously calm tone. "If I find out that you treated these girls with disrespect after I leave here, if I learn that you humiliated them or harmed them in any way, you will discover what kind of trouble a man with my resources can create for a small business like this." The bistro owner paled. Ricardo Vance wasn't just any customer. He was known in business circles as someone who didn't make empty threats. His political and financial connections could easily turn any small business owner's life into a bureaucratic nightmare. "Of course, Mr. Vance," the man murmured, gesturing nervously towards the tables. "The corner table is available. I'll send our best waiter to attend to you immediately." As they walked to the table, Ricardo felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine pride in having done the right thing. Not the calculated pride of a successful negotiation or a lucrative acquisition, but the deep satisfaction of having used his power to protect those who truly needed protection. Sophia held his hand more tightly, whispering, "Thank you for fighting for what's right, mister." In that moment, Ricardo realized that his transformative journey wouldn't just be about helping two children in need. It would be about rediscovering the man he had buried under layers of ambition and emotional coldness. The man who was still capable of righteous anger and unconditional love. The corner table offered a privileged view of the bustling street, but Ricardo only had eyes for the two girls sitting across from him. Sophia looked around with a mixture of fascination and discomfort, as if fearing that at any moment someone would discover she didn't belong in that world of polished marble and sparkling crystals. Anna remained glued to her sister's arm, her large eyes absorbing every detail of the environment with the intensity of someone seeing magic for the first time. The waiter approached with forced courtesy, extending 3 menus bound in genuine leather. Ricardo watched Sophia take hers with both hands, as if it were a sacred object that could break with the slightest carelessness. When she opened it, her face expressed such profound confusion that his heart squeezed. "I can't read very well," Sophia whispered, her cheeks flushing with shame. "The shelter teacher was teaching me, but we left there before I learned properly." The naturalness with which the child admitted her limitation, without self-pity or resentment, simply as a fact of life, revealed to Ricardo another layer of the injustice those girls faced daily. How many educational opportunities had they lost? How many basic rights had been denied simply because they were born into unfavorable circumstances? "Don't worry," he said, pulling his chair closer to her. "I'll read to you, let's see. They have sandwiches, hot soups, pastas, desserts." As he read the menu, Ricardo noticed how Sophia listened to every word with religious attention, as if memorizing an epic poem. When he mentioned chocolate cake with vanilla ice cream, her eyes widened so much they seemed about to pop out of her face. "Chocolate cake," she repeated, as if the words were from a foreign language. "Really? Just like the ones we see in the bakery window?" "Even better," Ricardo assured, surprised by his own enthusiasm. "This one is made by a chef who studied in France." Sophia turned to Anna, translating in excited whispers. "Anna, they have real chocolate cake, the one we always dreamed of eating." Anna nodded timidly, an almost imperceptible smile curving her lips. It was the first expression of genuine joy Ricardo had seen in her, and the sight of that small face lighting up was like watching the sunrise after an endless night. "And what would you like to eat?" the waiter asked, his voice carrying ill-concealed impatience. Sophia looked at the menu again, then at Ricardo, then at Anna. The responsibility of choosing seemed overwhelming for a child accustomed to accepting any crumb life offered her. I can choose anything," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Anything," Ricardo confirmed. "And you can order as many things as you want. Today you eat like queens." Sophia remained silent for long minutes, her small fingers tracing the pages of the menu as if each option were a universe of infinite possibilities. Finally, she looked up with a determination that surprised Ricardo. "I want a sweet roll," she said, her choice sounding almost like a confession. "A really fresh, sweet roll with no green on it." The simplicity of the choice hit Ricardo like a punch to the gut. Amidst so many luxurious options, the child had chosen exactly what had been denied her in the first scene he witnessed. Not the chocolate cake that had fascinated her, not the elaborate dishes she had never tasted, but simply a fresh, sweet roll, the dignified version of what she had been forced to find in the trash. "And for Anna?" Ricardo asked, his voice choked with an emotion he struggled to control. Sophia leaned towards her little sister, whispering something in her ear. Anna nodded vigorously, and then hid again behind Sophia's arm. "She wants the same thing as me," Sophia translated, but she hesitated, biting her lower lip nervously. Can we take a little piece for our other little sister?" Ricardo's world stopped. His hands went cold on the menu, his heart pounded as if he had received an electric shock. "Your other little sister?" "Yes," Sophia confirmed, unaware of the devastating impact of her words. "The tiny one. She's only 2 years old, so she can't walk very far to look for food. We always leave her in our little spot, hidden so no one finds her." The revelation that there was a third child, even smaller and more vulnerable, waiting somewhere for her sisters to return with food, hit Ricardo with the force of an avalanche. 3 children, 3 small, precious lives surviving in the shadows of a city that pretended not to see them. "Of course. You can take some," he managed to say, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. "You can take as many pieces as you want." As the waiter wrote down the order, 3 sweet rolls, 3 glasses of chocolate milk, and an entire pie to share, Ricardo struggled to process the magnitude of the responsibility he had unknowingly taken on. It wasn't just 2 children who needed help, it was 3. And if there were 3 here, how many others were scattered throughout the city, invisible to people like him who lived shielded in ivory towers? Sophia held his hand across the table, her eyes shining with a heartbreaking gratitude. "Thank you for being the first person who didn't send us away," she said. "Anna and I always knew that one day someone good would show up. We just didn't know it would be today." In that moment, as he looked at those 2 dirty but radiant faces filled with hope, Ricardo realized that his life had definitively split into 2 parts, before and after that encounter in the alley, and there was no turning back. The walk to the girl's home was a journey through invisible layers of the city Ricardo had never imagined existed. Sophia guided the group with the confidence of someone who knew every loose stone, every pothole in the asphalt, every shadow that offered protection or danger. She carried a bag with the extra sweet rolls they had ordered, protecting it as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. "It's right there," she said, pointing to a structure hidden under an abandoned overpass on the outskirts of the commercial center. "We like it there because when it rains, the water doesn't get in much." As they approached, Ricardo began to distinguish details that made his stomach churn. What he had imagined to be a simple makeshift shelter revealed itself to be a masterpiece of child survival. Cardboard boxes had been carefully woven together with plastics and pieces of fabric, creating walls that offered an illusion of privacy and protection. An old plank served as a door, and small stones arranged around the structure suggested some kind of primitive drainage system. "Anna, go get the little one," Sophia whispered. "Tell her we brought good food." Anna disappeared through a side opening of the structure, and seconds later emerged carrying in her arms a child so small and fragile that Ricardo felt his legs weaken. The 2-year-old girl was an even more vulnerable version of her sisters. Curly hair covered in dirt, clothes that were little more than rags, but eyes that sparkled with the same indomitable light as the other two. "This is Lila," Sophia introduced with a heartbreaking maternal pride. "She's our baby. We've been taking care of her since our parents went to heaven." Lila observed Ricardo with curiosity more than fear, her tiny fingers playing with the dirty necklace she wore, apparently the only toy she possessed. When Sophia showed her the fresh sweet roll, the child's eyes widened, and she clapped her hands with such pure joy that Ricardo felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Do you 3 live here alone?" he asked, his voice coming out huskier than intended. "For how long?" "About 6 months," Sophia replied with the naturalness of someone talking about the weather. "At first it was hard because Lila cried a lot and people got angry, but we learned how to make her quiet when people are around." The revelation that a 2-year-old child had been trained to suppress her natural communication instincts to ensure the group's safety was like a slap to Ricardo's conscience. How many nights had those children spent sleepless, hungry and cold, comforting a baby who didn't understand why her life was so different from the stories other children lived? "And when you get sick?" he asked, observing the precarious conditions around them. "Anna knows how to make tea with some leaves, she finds," Sophia explained, sitting on the ground and carefully beginning to divide one of the sweet rolls into 3 exactly equal parts. "And when we have a high fever, we go to church on Sunday because it has air conditioning there." The devastating simplicity of those makeshift solutions revealed to Ricardo the extent of creativity and resilience those children had developed to survive. They had created a complete system of life based on resources that most adults would consider inadequate even for pets. Lila nibbled on her piece of sweet roll with absolute concentration, each chew savored as if it were the first meal of her life. When she finished, she approached Ricardo shyly and extended her dirty little hands towards him. "She wants you to pick her up," Sophia translated. "She likes people who smell good." Ricardo hesitated for a moment. When was the last time he had held a child? When was the last time someone had shown such absolute trust in his kindness? With careful movements, he lifted Lila, surprised by the alarming lightness of her small body. The child nestled against his chest like a kitten seeking warmth, and Ricardo felt something fundamental reconfigure within his heart. The sensation of protecting something so small and defenseless awakened instincts he didn't know he possessed, a primitive tenderness that swept away decades of emotional detachment. "Mister," Sophia said, observing the scene with a smile that completely transformed her face. "You're like a dad." The innocent observation hit Ricardo like a lightning bolt. Father, a word he had long banished from his vocabulary, along with concepts like family, home, and unconditional love. His life had been built around acquisitions and achievements, not care and protection. "You know," he said, his voice laden with a determination that surprised him, "you shouldn't be living like this. You deserve a real home, with warm beds, food in the fridge, and adults who take care of you." Sophia looked at him with a premature wisdom that broke his heart. "We know, mister. But we also know that the world isn't fair. Our shelter teacher used to say that we had to be strong because people wouldn't always be good to us." The mature resignation of that 6-year-old child in the face of the systemic injustice she faced awakened in Ricardo an anger he didn't know he was still capable of feeling. Not the cold, calculated anger of business, but a burning, protective fury that demanded immediate action. As he watched the three sisters affectionately sharing the last pieces of sweet roll, taking care of each other with a devotion that most adults didn't show even for themselves, Ricardo made a decision that would change all their lives forever. They wouldn't spend another night in that place. Ricardo had spent 3 days transforming one of the guest rooms in his mansion into a suitable refuge for the three girls. New beds, colorful clothes, educational toys. Each purchase was an attempt to compensate for years of deprivation in a matter of hours. Seeing Sophia, Anna, and Lila timidly exploring their new environment, touching each object as if it were made of pure crystal, filled a void in his soul that he didn't even know existed. On Thursday morning, as he watched Lila play with a new doll in the garden and the two older sisters leaf through illustrated books in the library, Ricardo felt a peace he hadn't experienced in decades. For the first time in his adult life, his house truly felt like a home. The sound of the doorbell cut through the morning tranquility like an alarm siren. Ricardo frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. And he had instructed his assistant to cancel all appointments for the week to dedicate himself entirely to the girls. When he opened the door, he found himself face to face with the last person he wanted to see, his sister, Patricia Vance. At 45, Patricia Vance carried the cold beauty of high society like armor. Her perfectly aligned blonde hair, her impeccable designer suit, and her discreet but expensive jewelry proclaimed her social standing miles away. But it was her eyes that revealed her true nature. Calculating, greedy, and devoid of the slightest spark of genuine compassion. "Ricardo," she said, pushing her way into the house without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk. Urgently." "Patricia," he replied, closing the door reluctantly. "It's not a good time. I'm busy with 2 beggars you brought home, as if they were stray puppies." Her voice cut the air like a razor. "Yes, I know everything. The whole city is talking about your midlife crisis." Ricardo felt his blood boil. The way she referred to the girls, as if they were disposable objects, awakened in him the same protective instinct that had emerged in the bistro, but amplified by the emotional intimacy he had developed with the children. "They have names," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Sophia, Anna, and Lila. And they're not beggars. They're children who needed help." Patricia laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the house like shattering glass. "Oh, Ricardo, always the idealist. Do you really believe you're doing something noble? You're playing house with street kids while compromising our family's future." "What future?" Ricardo exploded. "Or the future where you inherit half of everything I've built while contributing absolutely nothing but criticism and greed." Patricia's eyes gleamed with a coldness that reminded Ricardo why he had distanced himself from her years ago. "Our father didn't build this empire for you to squander on misguided charity, and I won't stand by watching you get emotionally involved with these creatures." Creatures. The word came out as a roar. "And you're talking about 3 orphaned children who were literally starving on the streets of this city." "And how many others are out there?" Patricia retorted, gesturing dramatically. "Are you going to adopt all of them? Are you going to turn our family inheritance into an orphanage? For God's sake, Ricardo, use your head. These girls are just the first. Soon you'll have a line of opportunists knocking at your door." It was then that Sophia appeared at the top of the stairs, her confused expression alternating between Ricardo and the elegant woman who spoke about them as if they were a plague. Anna followed close behind, carrying Lila, and the 3 children slowly descended the steps, drawn by the argument echoing through the house. Patricia looked at them with a thinly veiled expression of disgust. "Ah, how convenient. The stars of the show have arrived." "Mr. Vance," Sophia whispered, approaching him hesitantly, "is the lady angry with us? Did we do something wrong?" The innocence of the question and the genuine fear on the child's face hit Ricardo like a punch to the gut. To see Sophia, who had demonstrated extraordinary courage to protect her younger sisters, shrink before Patricia's casual cruelty awakened in him a fury that threatened to consume all his civilized upbringing. "No. Sweetie," he said, kneeling to her height, "you didn't do anything wrong. You are perfect exactly as you are." Patricia huffed with impatience. "Ricardo, stop this charade. You're behaving like a rebellious teenager, not the CEO of a multi-million-dollar conglomerate. These children are not your responsibility." "They are now," Ricardo replied, standing up and placing himself between Patricia and the girls. "And if you can't accept that, then perhaps it's time for us to re-evaluate our family relationship." "Our family relationship?" Patricia's eyes flashed dangerously. "Are you threatening to disinherit me because of 3 beggars?" "Stop calling them that." Ricardo's shout made the girls hug each other more tightly. "And yes, if necessary, I'm considering all options." Patricia took a step back, her mask of superiority slipping for a moment to reveal underlying panic. The real possibility of losing her inheritance, the money she already considered partially hers, was completely new and terrifying territory. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "You think you can simply rewrite our entire family history on an emotional whim. I won't let you destroy everything our family worked for." "Our family?" Ricardo laughed bitterly. "Deal, when was the last time you showed the slightest interest in family beyond the financial aspects? When was the last time you asked how I was, or if I needed something besides a signature on inheritance documents?" Patricia opened her mouth to reply, but found no words. The truth of Ricardo's accusations hung in the air like a toxic mist, impossible to deny or explain. "I'll give you time to process this," Ricardo said, walking towards the door. But let one thing be very clear. These girls are now part of my life. If you can't accept that, then you've chosen your side." As Patricia stormed out, her last words echoed through the house like a sinister promise. "This isn't over, Ricardo. You'll find you messed with the wrong person." Sophia tugged at his shirt sleeve. "Mister, are we going to have to leave because of us?" Ricardo looked at those 3 worried little faces and felt his resolve solidify like tempered steel. "Never," he said, hugging all 3 at once. "You are home, and I will protect our family from anyone who tries to harm you." In that moment, Ricardo had no idea that Patricia was already formulating a plan that would test his determination beyond all imaginable limits. A week had passed since the confrontation with Patricia, and Ricardo was beginning to believe that perhaps his sister had finally accepted the new reality. The girls were flourishing in their new environment. Sophia had begun to read children's books with impressive veracity. Anna smiled more each day, and Lila had taken her first shaky steps across the garden, always towards Ricardo's safe arms. On Monday morning, as they had breakfast together on the sunny porch, a ritual that had become sacred to him, Ricardo received a call that chilled his blood. It was Marcus, his personal lawyer for over 15 years. "Ricardo, we need to meet urgently," Marcus said, his voice laden with a concern Ricardo rarely heard. "Your sister has filed a petition in court, claiming you are mentally and emotionally incapacitated to manage your own affairs." The fork slipped from Ricardo's hand, clattering against the plate with a metallic sound that made the girls look at him with concern. Sophia, always the most perceptive, instinctively approached and held his hand. "What exactly does she allege?" Ricardo asked, struggling to keep his voice steady in front of the children. "Severe emotional instability, irrational decisions involving family resources, and," Marcus hesitated, "inappropriate behavior with minors." "Ricardo, she's painting a very dangerous picture of you." The accusation hit Ricardo like a lightning bolt. The idea that someone could distort his paternal love for those children into something sordid and criminal made his stomach churn. He looked at Sophia, Anna, and Lila, 3 little angels who had turned his house into a home, who had taught him the real meaning of family. and felt a rage that threatened to consume him entirely. "Did she present evidence?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "Photos taken from a distance of you together, testimonies from concerned witnesses about your erratic behavior, and a psychological analysis based on, well, rumors and speculation. But Ricardo, in cases like this, the initial accusation is enough to cause irreparable damage to your reputation." After hanging up the phone, Ricardo sat in silence, trying to process the magnitude of his sister's betrayal. She wasn't just attacking his financial stability, she was attacking his moral integrity, his reputation, and potentially his ability to protect the girls. "Mister, are you sad?" Sophia asked, climbing onto his lap with the naturalness of a true daughter. "Did we do something that made you worried?" "No, my love," he replied, hugging her tightly. "You are the most precious thing in my life. It's just that some adults sometimes do things that aren't very nice when they get jealous." Anna approached timidly, offering him her favorite doll. "Mister, when I'm sad, I hug Princess Rose, and she helps me feel better. You can hug her too." The child's innocent generosity, offering her most precious possession to comfort him, almost made Ricardo break down in tears. How could Patricia look at those pure children and see something different from love and light? The phone rang again. This time it was Helen, his executive assistant, and her voice was charged with a tension Ricardo had never heard before. "Mr. Vance, we have a serious problem. The economic press is publishing articles questioning your leadership capacity. The company's stock has dropped 12% since yesterday, and 3 of our largest investors have requested emergency meetings." Ricardo closed his eyes, feeling the weight of Patricia's coordinated strategy closing around him like a net. She wasn't just attacking him legally and socially. She was aiming at the heart of his business empire, knowing that his professional identity had been his emotional anchor for decades. "Helen, cancel all meetings this week and prepare an official statement asserting that any rumor about my mental stability is completely unfounded and potentially criminal. Sir, with all due respect, perhaps it would be better for you to make some public appearances to calm the market. Your absence is being interpreted as confirmation of the rumors." But Ricardo looked at the 3 girls playing innocently around him and knew there was no choice to make. They had spent years being abandoned by adults who were supposed to protect them. He wouldn't be another one. "Helen, I have more important responsibilities now. The company has survived crises before and will survive this one too." After hanging up, Ricardo noticed that Sophia had been listening to the conversation with the premature attention of a child who had learned to identify danger in the voices of adults. "Mister," she said, her little voice laden with a heartbreaking maturity, "if we leave, will you be less worried?" The question hit Ricardo like a stab. To see that 6-year-old child offering to sacrifice the only stability she had known to protect him revealed the depth of the love that had grown between them. "Sophia, listen to me carefully," he said, kneeling to her height and holding her small but precious hands. "No matter what happens, no matter what problems arise, you 3 are my family now, and families don't abandon each other." "Even if people get angry with you?" Anna asked, joining the conversation. "Especially when people get angry with me," Ricardo replied, hugging both girls, "because that means I'm doing the right thing." Lila, who had been playing with wooden blocks on the rug, stood up unsteadily and walked to Ricardo, extending her little arms to be picked up. When he lifted her, she rested her head on his shoulder and whispered the first clear word he had ever heard her say, "Daddy." In that moment, with the 3 girls nestled against him like cubs seeking protection, Ricardo made a decision that would change everything. He would fight Patricia to the end, but more importantly, he would protect his new family no matter the cost. What he didn't know was that, at that exact moment, Patricia was in a meeting with social workers, planting seeds of doubt that would soon blossom into a storm that threatened to destroy everything he had built with those girls. Thursday afternoon unfolded in deceptive tranquility when 3 official cars pulled up in front of Ricardo's mansion. Sophia, who was playing in the garden with her sisters, was the first to notice the uniformed figures getting out of the vehicles. Her expression instantly changed from childish contentment to the absolute terror of someone who had learned to fear authority. "Anna! Lila! Run!" she shouted, her voice laden with a panic that made Ricardo rush out of the library where he was working on his laptop. When he reached the garden, he found Sophia pushing her younger sisters towards the bushes at the back of the property, while 3 social workers and 2 police officers approached from the main entrance. The scene was a nightmare in slow motion, his girls fleeing in terror, and strangers with clipboards and professionally neutral expressions invading the sanctuary he had created for his new family. "Mr. Vance?" asked a middle-aged woman, consulting her papers. "I'm social worker Margaret Torres. We received an anonymous report about a possible irregular situation involving minors under your care. We need to inspect the living conditions and speak with the children." Ricardo felt the world spinning around him. The bureaucratic coldness with which those strangers spoke about his girls, as if they were objects to be catalogued and redistributed, awakened in him a primal anger that threatened to explode. "Anonymous report?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice controlled. "Based on what tier exactly?" "Allegations that you are keeping 3 minors in a potentially dangerous situation without proper legal documentation or temporary guardianship authorization," the social worker recited as if reading a recipe. "Questions have also been raised about your emotional stability and motivations." Through the living room window, Ricardo could see Sophia trying to calm Lila, who was crying silently while Anna held both sisters' hands tightly. The terror on the 3 children's faces was so palpable that he felt his heart break. "May I see the report documents?" he asked, extending his hand. "Anonymous reports are protected by confidentiality," Margaret Torres replied. But Ricardo noticed an embarrassment in her voice that suggested she knew exactly who had made the report. "Mr. Vance, we need to speak with the girls separately. It's standard protocol." "Separately?" The word came out as a roar. "These children have just found stability for the first time in their lives. You're going to traumatize them further by separating them." One of the police officers stepped forward, his hand casually resting on his holster. "Sir, let's keep this civil. We're just doing our duty." It was then that Ricardo heard a scream that chilled his blood. Sophia had been found by the social workers and was being gently but firmly separated from her younger sisters. Anna cried uncontrollably, reaching out for her older sister, while Lila simply huddled like a wounded animal. "Please, don't separate us," Sophia pleaded, her voice laden with a desperation that cut the air like a blade. "She's all I have. We promise to be good, promise not to cause trouble." The scene was devastating. Seeing those 3 children who had survived together on the streets being forcibly separated by well-meaning strangers, completely oblivious to their history, ignited a fury in Ricardo that threatened to consume all his rationality. "Stop!" he shouted, rushing towards the group. "You don't understand. They're orphans who took care of each other for months. Separating them is pure cruelty." "Mr. Vance," Margaret Torres said, with the professional patience of someone who had dealt with thousands of similar cases, "I understand your concern, but these children need individual assessment to determine the best course of action for each one." "The best course of action?" Ricardo felt his voice rise an octave. "The best course of action is to leave them where they are happy, safe, and loved." "Unfortunately, love is not enough in the eyes of the law," the social worker replied, signaling her colleagues to continue the separation process. "These children need legal documentation, psychological evaluation, and placement in licensed foster homes." Sophia was placed in one of the official cars, her tears leaving glistening trails on her face as she strained her neck to maintain eye contact with her sisters. Anna and Lila were directed to separate vehicles, their cries of protest echoing through the garden like a symphony of broken hearts. "Mr. Vance!" Sophia shouted through the car window. "Don't let them separate us. You promised we'd stay together." The innocent but devastating accusation hit Ricardo like a shot to the chest. He had promised to protect them. He had sworn they would never again experience abandonment. And now he was watching helplessly as the system that was supposed to protect children traumatized them even further. "I'll come get you," he shouted back, running after the cars that were already starting to move. "I promise I'll bring you back. Don't give up on me." Margaret Torres placed a hand on his shoulder with feigned compassion. "Mr. Vance, I know it's difficult, but this is for the best for everyone involved. The children will be placed in appropriate temporary homes while we resolve the legal situation." "Separate temporary homes," Ricardo said, his voice laden with a bitterness that surprised him. "You're going to destroy the only family they know in the name of bureaucracy. Sometimes it's necessary to cause temporary pain to ensure long-term well-being," she replied, putting away her papers as if she had just completed another routine task on her schedule. As the cars disappeared around the bend in the street, taking with them the 3 pieces of his heart he hadn't even known he possessed, Ricardo fell to his knees in the middle of his perfect garden. The silence that followed was deafening. There were no more children's laughs, no more tiny feet running through the house, no more voices calling Mr. Vance with genuine joy. His mansion, which for weeks had been a home full of life and love, reverted to being just an empty, cold structure. But this time, the loneliness was 1,000 times worse, because now he knew exactly what he had lost. And somewhere in the city, 3 girls cried in different places, wondering if the adult they had learned to love as a father would be just another one who abandoned them when things got tough. Ricardo didn't sleep for 3 consecutive days. His desk was covered in legal papers, lists of group homes and foster families, and dozens of phone numbers scribbled on napkins and scraps of paper. His eyes were red and swollen. His unshaven beard gave him a wild appearance, and his crumpled clothes told the story of a man who had completely abandoned his meticulous appearance in favor of a singular obsession, finding his girls. Marcus, his lawyer, watched him with growing concern as Ricardo made his 15th call of the morning, trying to track Sophia, Anna and Lila's whereabouts through the bureaucratic labyrinth of the Child Protective Services system. "Yes, I understand you can't release information about minors, but I'm the only family they know," Ricardo said into the phone, his voice hoarse from repeating the same explanation. "No, I don't have legal guardianship yet, but we're working on it." "What do you mean they were transferred to another county?" When he hung up the phone, Ricardo slammed his fist on the table so hard that Marcus jumped. "They've been scattered across 3 different cities," he said, his voice filled with a heartbreaking desolation. "Sophia's in a group home 2 hours from here. Anna went to a foster family in another direction, and no one will tell me where Lila is." "Ricardo," Marcus said carefully, "we need to approach this more strategically. Your sister is using your desperation against you, the more unstable you appear." "Unstable?" Ricardo laughed bitterly. "Marcus, I have 3 terrified children scattered across the region, being cared for by strangers who don't know their stories, their fears, their needs. Sophia is probably spending her nights awake, taking care of other children because that's what she's always done. Anna is shutting down because that's how she reacts when she feels abandoned. And Lila," his voice broke, "Lila is still a baby. She doesn't understand why her daddy just disappeared." The phone rang, interrupting the moment of vulnerability. Ricardo answered with desperate hope, but the voice on the other end of the line chilled his blood. "Hello, little brother," Patricia said, her voice laced with poisonous satisfaction. "I hear you've been a bit lost lately." "Patricia," Ricardo growled, "you're the one who made the anonymous report Me? What a serious accusation, she laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the phone. I merely expressed legitimate concern about the well-being of vulnerable children who were being kept by someone clearly experiencing an emotional crisis. Where are they? Ricardo asked, his voice dangerously low. I know you have information. Your connections in the legal system are too extensive for you not to know. Even if I did know, Patricia replied with false innocence. Why would I help someone who threatened me with disinheritance? Someone who chose 3 street kids over their own family? Ricardo felt a rage so intense that his hands trembled. They are my family now. And if you've harmed them in any way... Oh, Ricardo, Patricia interrupted. You still don't understand, do you? I don't need to harm them. The system is doing it for me. Every day they spend away from you. Every night they cry calling for a daddy who can't protect them. Every trauma they accumulate from being abandoned again, all of that is happening as we speak. The calculated cruelty of Patricia's words hit Ricardo like a series of punches to the gut. She wasn't just attacking him, she was using the suffering of 3 innocent children as a psychological weapon. What do you want? He asked, his voice coming out as a defeated whisper. Ah, now we're getting to the point, Patricia said, and Ricardo could hear the poisonous smile in her voice. I want a public statement that you acknowledge having experienced temporary emotional instability. I want you relinquishing active control of the company in favor of a board of directors I appoint, and I want a legal guarantee that you won't attempt to adopt or take custody of any child for the next 5 years. The silence that followed was charged with a tension that made Marcus hold his breath. Ricardo was being forced to choose between his professional identity, his personal pride, and the 3 children who had become the center of his emotional universe. And if I do that, he asked finally, do you guarantee they will be reunited and placed with a good family? I'll do my best to influence the system in their favor, Patricia replied with the calculated vagueness of a seasoned politician. But understand, Ricardo, even if they are reunited, you can never be near them again. That's the consequence of your choices. Ricardo closed his eyes, visualizing the faces of Sophia, Anna, and Lila. He remembered Sophia's smile when she managed to read her first full sentence. He recalled Anna offering her favorite doll to comfort him when he was sad. He relived the moment Lila called him Daddy for the first time. I need time to think, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Would you have until tomorrow at noon? Patricia replied coldly. After that, I can guarantee that the girls will be transferred to even more distant homes. Who knows? Perhaps even adopted separately by families who don't even know they are sisters. The line went dead, leaving Ricardo alone with the weight of an impossible decision. Marcus watched him in silence, recognizing that there were no words of comfort appropriate for that moment. Marcus, Ricardo said finally, his voice laden with a determination that surprised both men, cancel all my appointments for the next few months. We're filing a lawsuit against Patricia for manipulation of the justice system and emotional extortion. And we're going to do this while I use every connection, every favor owed to me, every resource at my disposal to find my girls. Ricardo, this could financially and socially ruin you, Marcus warned. Ricardo looked out his office window, seeing the garden where 3 children had played happily just a week earlier. Marcus, I built a financial empire, but I lost my soul in the process. These girls gave me back my humanity. If I have to choose between being rich and empty or poor and a father, the choice is obvious. In that moment, with the determination of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for, Ricardo began to plan the most important battle of his life. The courtroom was packed that Friday morning. Journalists, curious onlookers, and high society figures squeezed into the galleries to witness what the press had dubbed the millionaire and the orphans case. Ricardo observed the crowd with a mixture of nausea and determination, knowing that his private life had become public entertainment. 3 weeks had passed since the girls were taken. 3 weeks of frantic investigations, legal battles, and sleepless nights that had transformed Ricardo into a ghostly version of himself, but also 3 weeks that had revealed the extent of Patricia's manipulation and strengthened his determination to fight until the end. Marcus had managed to track the girls. Sophia was in an overcrowded group home in the suburbs. Anna had been placed with a foster family, already caring for 6 other children. And Lila, the most devastating discovery, was in a children's hospital, having developed severe depression that had prevented her from eating or sleeping properly since the separation. Mr. Vance, the judge, a 60-year-old man with a stern expression, said, "This hearing has been convened to determine the best interest of the minors, Sophia, Anna, and Lila, currently in state custody. Are you aware of the allegations against your capacity to care for these children?" "I am, Your Honor," Ricardo replied, standing up. His voice was firm, but his hands trembled slightly. "And I would like to respond to each of them." Patricia sat on the other side of the courtroom, impeccably dressed and displaying a studied expression of concern. Beside her, a team of expensive lawyers organized piles of documents that painted Ricardo as an unstable and potentially dangerous man. "Before we proceed," the judge said, "I'd like to inform you that I've received an unusual request. The minor Sophia has asked permission to testify in her own case, although it is irregular for a 6-year-old. I would very much like to hear what she has to say, Your Honor," Ricardo interrupted, his heart pounding. "Sophia is extraordinarily mature for her age. She has the right to speak about her own future." The murmur in the courtroom increased as a staff member brought Sophia into the room. Ricardo felt his world stop when he saw her. The girl who had flourished in his home, who had gained weight and color in her cheeks, who had learned to smile without fear, now looked like a shrunken version of herself. Her new clothes were clean but ill-fitting, her hair was hastily combed, and her eyes, those bright eyes that had captivated him on the first day, were dimmed by sadness. But when Sophia saw him, her entire face lit up. "Mr. Vance!" she cried, trying to run towards him before being gently restrained by the staff member. "Sophia," the judge said in a softer voice, "do you understand why you are here?" "Yes, Mr. Judge," she replied, her voice small but determined. "People want to know if Mr. Vance is a good person to take care of me and my sisters." "And what would you like to tell us about that?" Sophia took a deep breath, as if preparing for the most important speech of her life. "Mr. Vance was the first person who didn't send us away when we asked for food. He was the first person who got angry when someone was mean to us. He was the first person who said we deserved to have a family." Tears began to stream down Ricardo's face. In the absolute silence of the courtroom, Sophia's childlike voice echoed like a prayer. "Before I met Mr. Vance, I thought we would always be alone. I thought adults were only good for sending children away or hurting them when they got angry." Sophia looked directly at Patricia. "But that lady over there told the other adults that Mr. Vance was a bad person. She lied." Patricia paled, her lawyers whispering urgently in her ears. "How do you know she lied?" the judge asked. "Because bad people don't cry when a child is sad," Sophia replied with devastating simplicity. "Bad people don't wake up in the middle of the night when a child has a nightmare. Bad people don't learn to braid hair just because a child asked." She pointed to Ricardo. "Mr. Vance did all that. He loved us when we didn't even know how to be loved." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the journalists had stopped scribbling in their notebooks. "Sophia," the judge said, his voice choked, "would you like to go back to living with Mr. Vance?" "My sisters and I just want to stay together," she replied. "We promise we won't cause any trouble. We promise we'll be good. We just want someone to love us for who we are." When Sophia finished speaking, not a single person in the courtroom wasn't moved. Even some of Patricia's lawyers looked uncomfortable with the situation. "I'd like to call a defense witness," Marcus said, standing up. Dr. Elena Vasquez, child psychologist who evaluated the girls during their stay with Mr. Vance. A middle-aged woman approached the witness stand. "Your Honor, in 30 years of my career, I've never seen traumatized children recover as quickly as Sophia, Anna, and Lila recovered under Mr. Vance's care. They developed healthy emotional bonds, showed significant progress in cognitive and emotional development, and demonstrated all the signs of being in a safe and loving environment. And what is your assessment of their separation?" the judge asked. "It was devastating," the psychologist replied without hesitation. "Lila developed symptoms of severe depression. Anna regressed to behaviors she had overcome, and Sophia reassumed the role of primary caregiver, trying to protect other children in the group home because that's what she's done her whole life." She looked directly at Ricardo. "These children don't need institutions or temporary families. They need to go home." When it was Patricia's turn to testify, her former confidence had evaporated. Under the weight of the emotional testimonies and the clear evidence that her motivations were purely financial, she appeared small and petty in the face of the greatness of the love Ricardo had demonstrated for the girls. "Ms. Vance," the judge said, "your allegations regarding your brother's incapacity seem to be in direct conflict with all the evidence presented today. Do you have anything to add?" Patricia looked around the courtroom, seeing the disapproval on the faces watching her, and for the first time in her life, found herself speechless. The judge deliberated for only 15 minutes before returning with his decision. "Based on the testimonies presented and in the best interest of the minors involved, I grant temporary custody of Sophia, Anna, and Lila to Mr. Ricardo Vance, with formal adoption proceedings to be initiated immediately." The sound that echoed through the courtroom when Sophia ran into Ricardo's arms was that of hearts reuniting after a separation that had lasted an eternity. The children's hospital where Lila was admitted seemed a maze of white corridors and antiseptic smells as Ricardo rushed through its hallways, firmly holding Sophia's and Anna's hands. The two girls had insisted on accompanying him to pick up their little sister, and he didn't have the heart to deny them after all they had been through. "Will she remember us?" Anna asked for the 5th time in 10 minutes, her small voice laden with heartbreaking anxiety. "She was so tiny when they took us." "Of course she will remember," Sophia replied, with the forced confidence of an older sister trying to be strong. "Lila's smart. She knows who we are." But Ricardo could see the genuine concern in Sophia's eyes. 3 weeks was a long time in the life of a 2-year-old, especially one who had experienced significant trauma. The psychologist had warned that Lila might be different, that childhood depression sometimes left marks that took time to heal. When they reached the pediatric ward, Ricardo had to lean against the wall for a moment. Through the glass window, he could see a tiny figure lying in a hospital bed that seemed too large for her. Lila was awake, but stared blankly at the ceiling with an empty expression that was terrible to see in such a small child. "Can I go in first?" Sophia asked, her premature maturity resurfacing. "She might get scared if she sees too many people at once." Ricardo nodded, watching through the glass as Sophia carefully approached the bed. For a moment, Lila didn't react. Then, slowly, her eyes turned to her older sister. What happened next was like watching a miracle unfold in slow motion. Lila's face gradually transformed, the empty expression giving way to recognition, then to pure, uncontrollable joy. She sat up in bed with difficulty, extending her little arms towards Sophia. "Fia, Fia," she cried, using her 2-year-old version of her sister's name. "You're back. I thought you forgot me." Sophia climbed onto the bed and hugged Lila so tightly that both began to cry. Not tears of sadness, but the kind of crying that comes when a broken heart finally finds its other half. "I would never forget you, little one," Sophia whispered, kissing her sister's head. "I promised we'd always stay together. Remember, sisters don't forget each other." Anna couldn't wait any longer and ran into the room, joining the collective hug on the hospital bed. The three girls clung to each other like shipwrecked survivors who had finally found solid ground after weeks adrift at sea. Ricardo watched from the doorway, tears streaming freely down his face. To see those three children reuniting, to witness the pure joy of a love that had survived forced separation and trauma, was like watching tangible proof that genuine goodness existed in the world. "Where's Daddy?" Lila asked suddenly, looking around the room with wide eyes. The question made Ricardo's heart stop. She was referring to him. "He's right here, silly," Anna said, pointing to the door. "Daddy brought us to pick you up." When Lila saw Ricardo, her reaction was even more intense than with her sisters. She practically leapt from the bed, stumbling on her still weak little legs, running towards him with a desperation that spoke of weeks of misunderstood longing. "Daddy! Daddy, you didn't forget me!" she cried, clinging to his legs as if fearing he might disappear again. "I was good, I promise. I didn't cry much. Please, don't leave me again." Ricardo knelt down and picked her up, feeling how much weight she had lost during her stay in the hospital. Her small body trembled against his as she clung to his neck with desperate strength. "I'm never going to leave you again," he promised, his voice choked with emotion. "Never again, my love. Never again." The nurse, who had been caring for Lila, approached with tears in her eyes. "In 15 years working here, I've never seen a child recover so quickly. She wasn't eating. She wasn't sleeping. She barely spoke. The doctors were worried she might have developed selective mutism, but look at her now." Indeed, Lila was chattering non-stop, telling her sisters about the nice doctors and the beds that flew up and down, the adjustable hospital beds, but mostly asking if they were going home together and if they could sleep in the same bed that night. "Are we going home now?" Sophia asked, looking at Ricardo with a vulnerability she rarely allowed to appear. "To a real home, where we can always stay together." "We're going home," Ricardo confirmed, hugging the three girls at once. "To our home, forever." As they walked through the corridors of the hospital towards the exit, a small procession of family joy, Ricardo reflected on how his definition of wealth had completely changed. Weeks earlier, his fortune was measured in bank accounts and assets. Now, all his wealth fit in his arms. Three children who had taught him that true love is not earned, it is given. At the hospital exit, Sophia stopped and looked back one last time. "Thank you for taking care of our little sister," she said to the nurses who had gathered to say goodbye. "You're good people too." In that moment, Ricardo realized that Sophia had inherited more than traumas from her life experience. She had developed an extraordinary ability to recognize and appreciate kindness wherever she found it. It was a lesson she was teaching him every day. When they got to the car, the three girls insisted on sitting together in the back seat, refusing to be separated for even the few feet the drive home would require. Ricardo watched in the rearview mirror as they whispered secrets, shared discoveries about their separate weeks, and especially constantly touched each other, as if they needed the physical confirmation that they were truly reunited. For the first time in his life, Ricardo was driving home knowing that he would find exactly what mattered most in the world, waiting for him there. 6 months had passed since the day of the court hearing, and Ricardo's house had transformed into something he never imagined could exist. A true home. The walls, once pristine, now displayed colorful drawings made by tiny artistic hands. The formal library had given way to a cozy reading nook filled with children's books, and the meticulously manicured garden now had a playground where childish laughter echoed from dawn. On Saturday morning, Ricardo woke up not to the sound of an alarm clock, but to Lila climbing into his bed and whispering, "Daddy, can I make pancakes with you today?" At 3 years old, she had become a little chef, always eager to help with every meal, even if her help resulted more in flour scattered on the floor than in edible dishes. Sophia, now 7 years old, had flourished in ways that continued to surprise Ricardo. Enrolled in a private school where her teachers were impressed by her determination and intelligence, she had become the most dedicated student in her class. More importantly, she had learned to be a child again, to play without the constant responsibility of caring for her younger sisters. Anna, at 5 years old, had found her voice. The shy girl who barely spoke had transformed into a little storyteller, creating fantastic adventures about brave princesses and gentle dragons that always ended with happy families. Her laughter, once so rare, now filled the house several times a day. "Daddy," Sophia said during breakfast, using the title all three had naturally adopted, "my teacher wants to meet you next week. She said I have a very special family." Ricardo smiled, serving slightly burnt pancakes that Lila had helped to make. "And she's right. We really are very special." The adoption process had been finalized the previous month, in a simple but moving ceremony in the same courtroom where they had almost been separated forever. The judge who had decided the case made a point of presiding over the adoption, commenting that he had rarely seen such a remarkable transformation in both the children and the adoptive father. Patricia had practically disappeared from their lives. After the public humiliation of the trial and the revelation of her greedy motivations, she had moved to another state, taking with her only a small portion of the family inheritance that Ricardo had decided to let her keep. He found that holding a grudge required emotional energy. He preferred to invest in his new family. "Daddy," Anna said, interrupting his thoughts, "do you remember when we lived on the street and thought we'd never have a real family?" "I remember," Ricardo replied, pulling her onto his lap. "And do you remember what I said that first day? That all girls are princesses," Sophia said with a smile, "and that some just need to be reminded of it." "Exactly. And you three are my favorite princesses in the whole wide world." Lila clapped her hands with enthusiasm. "And you're our favorite daddy in the whole wide world." The innocent simplicity of the declaration made Ricardo laugh until he cried, "Well, I'm your only daddy, so that makes the choice easy." Later that day, while the girls played in the garden, Ricardo received a call that made him smile. It was Margaret Torres, the social worker who had initially separated the girls. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice filled with a sincerity he hadn't heard during the traumatic events months before. "I'm calling to formally apologize. I know I was just doing my job, but I recognize that perhaps I didn't assess the situation with the necessary sensitivity." "Margaret," Ricardo replied, watching Sophia teach Anna how to make a flower crown while Lila tried to imitate. "You were protecting vulnerable children. There's nothing to apologize for." "How are they?" she asked. Ricardo looked at his 3 daughters playing carefree under the afternoon sun. Sophia had gained 30 pounds and now had rosy, healthy cheeks. Anna had gotten rid of the night terrors that haunted her when they were separated. Lila had developed like any normal 3-year-old, curious, affectionate, and full of energy. "They're home," he said simply. That night, during the bedtime ritual they had developed, stories read together, lullabies sung in 3 off-key voices, and lots of goodnight kisses. Sophia asked a question that caught Ricardo by surprise. "Daddy, do you think our mommy and daddy in heaven are happy seeing us with you?" Ricardo thought carefully before replying. "You know what I think, Sophia. I think they're very happy knowing that you found someone who loves you as much as they loved you. And I think they know that you brought love back into the life of someone who had forgotten how to love." "You had forgotten how to love?" Anna asked, her big eyes full of curiosity. "I had," Ricardo admitted. "I had focused so much on work and making money that I forgot the really important things. Until 3 brave girls reminded me that true wealth isn't in what you have, but in who you love and who loves you back." "We love you very much, Daddy," Lila whispered, already sleepy. "And I love you more than all the stars in the sky," he replied, adjusting the covers around the 3 beds they had insisted on keeping in the same room. As he walked through the corridors of his home after putting the girls to bed, Ricardo reflected on how his life had completely changed. His company remained prosperous, but now he delegated much more responsibility. preferring to be present for school recitals, family movie nights, and the thousand small moments that made up daily life with children. He had learned that success was not measured in bank accounts or professional recognition, but in shared laughter, comforted tears, and the privilege of being the first person 3 small voices called when they woke up every morning. At the last stop, before going to his own room, Ricardo peeked through the open door of the girls' room. The 3 slept peacefully, their soft breaths creating a symphony of security that filled the house with a peace he had never known. Sophia had left a drawing on his nightstand, 4 figures holding hands in front of a big house, with a smiling sun in the sky and the words, "My family," written in crooked but loving letters. In that moment, Ricardo knew he had found not only a family, but his true purpose in life. 1 year after their first encounter in the alley, Ricardo walked hand in hand with Sophia, Inna and Lila towards what was once the high-end gourmet bistro downtown. The establishment had undergone a transformation as radical as his own life. The elegant facade now displayed a colorful sign that read, "Haven of Hope, Community Eatery," and the glass windows revealed a welcoming interior where children of all ages shared meals at tables that radiated warmth and joy. "Daddy, are you sure you won't be nervous?" Sophia asked, now an 8-year-old whose confidence had grown along with her stature. "It's the first time we're going to tell our story to so many people." Ricardo smiled, gently squeezing her hand. Today was the official inauguration of the project that had become the passion of his new life, an eatery that served free meals to vulnerable children, funded entirely by the sale of most of his properties and unnecessary investments. "I'll be fine," he assured her. "Oh, especially knowing that my 3 girls will be with me." Anna, now 6 years old and much more communicative, tugged his other hand. "And if any child is scared to talk, I'll tell her a story to calm her down." Lila, at 4 years old, skipped between them with the inexhaustible energy of a child, completely secure in her place in the world. "And I'll give hugs to anyone who's sad. My hugs are magical." When they entered the eatery, Ricardo was immediately hit by a wave of nostalgia. There was the same space where everything had begun, but transformed into something completely different. The cold marble tables had given way to colorful and cozy furniture. The walls displayed drawings made by children from the community, and the aroma that dominated the atmosphere was no longer that of exclusive gourmet coffee, but of fresh bread and homemade soup. "Mr. Vance," the cheerful voice came from a young woman who approached with a rainbow-decorated apron. It was Carmen, one of the many people who had volunteered to work on the project. "Everything's ready for the ceremony. The children are eager to meet you." Ricardo looked around and saw dozens of children of various ages sitting at the tables, some accompanied by adults, others clearly alone. His heart tightened as he recognized in many of those faces the same expression that Sophia, Anna, and Lila had carried on that first day, a mixture of cautious hope and fear of disappointment. "Children," Carmen said, gently clapping her hands to get attention, "I'd like to introduce Mr. Ricardo and his daughters Sophia, Anna, and Lila. They are the ones responsible for this place existing." A seemingly 5-year-old girl, with worn clothes but a clean face, timidly raised her hand. "Is it true that here we can eat without having to pay?" Sophia stepped forward, her posture revealing the natural leader she had become. "Yes, it's true. And you know why? Because every child deserves to eat when they're hungry. Every child deserves to be treated with kindness. But how do you know that?" asked an older boy, his voice laden with skepticism born of disillusionment. It was then that Sophia, Anna, and Lila exchanged glances, communicating with that silent language that only very close sisters develop. They had rehearsed this moment, but now that it had arrived, Ricardo could see courage forming in their small hearts. "Because we've been in your shoes," Sophia said, her voice clear and strong. "A year ago, My sisters and I lived on the streets. We looked for food in the trash and slept under an overpass. An absolute silence fell over the eatery. The children looked at Sophia with a mixture of surprise and recognition, while the adults present leaned forward, captivated by the pure honesty of that small speaker. One day, Sophia continued, I went into a fancy bistro and asked for day-old bread. The owner kicked me out, called me a beggar, and made me feel very small. She pointed to Ricardo. But this man was there, and instead of pretending he didn't see, he followed me. He found me eating moldy bread in the alley and decided that wasn't right. Anna joined the narrative, her sweet voice adding emotional layers to the story. He didn't just bring us here to give us food. He brought us because he saw that we were real people, with real feelings, who deserved real love. Lila, not wanting to be left out, added with the simplicity that only a 4-year-old possesses. And now he's our daddy forever. And we're a real family. The tears Ricardo had tried to control all morning finally began to stream. To see his daughters sharing their story with such courage, transforming their own pain into hope for other children, revealed to him the magnitude of the transformation that had occurred in all of them. Children, he said, his voice choked but firm, I want you to know one very important thing. You are not invisible. You are not a problem to be solved. You are treasures waiting to be discovered. A little girl in the front row, who couldn't have been more than 3 years old, stood up from her chair and walked to Ricardo. Without saying a word, she extended her little arms to be picked up. When he picked her up, she whispered in his ear, You're a nice daddy. In that moment, looking at the room full of children who now smiled with renewed hope, Ricardo realized that the circle had come full circle. The alley where Sophia had eaten moldy bread was just a few feet away, but now it was part of a route he traveled daily, looking for other children who needed help. The bistro that once symbolized exclusion and contempt had become a beacon of inclusion and second chances. The girls who had come into his life as symbols of his own lost compassion were now agents of transformation, spreading love and hope to other children walking the same difficult road they had traveled. As he watched Sophia teach a younger child to read the menu, Anna telling stories to a fascinated group, and Lila distributing genuinely magical hugs to anyone who seemed to need one, Ricardo knew he had found not only a family, but his true legacy. True wealth, he discovered, was not in material possessions or social approval, but in the courage to open one's heart to those who most need protection, even when it means sacrificing everything we thought defined us. The girls had discovered that they deserved love and care, and that their genuine gratitude for a piece of bread found in the trash had been what awakened the lost humanity of a powerful man, transforming him into the father they never knew they needed. And in that eatery full of children's laughter and second chances, where the aroma of fresh bread mingled with the certainty that every child deserves dignity, love, and the opportunity to dream of a better future, 4 hearts beat in unison. A family built not by blood, but by the transformative love that arises when we choose to see the humanity in every person who crosses our path.